Welcome, adventurers from around the world. Thank you so much for joining us today for our latest 1-hour webinar event. Publication planning is the topic today, your map to success. So thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy lives to join us today. A special shout out to our friends on WeChat from China. Great to see you all here today. And our new friends at Researcher app, thank you all for joining as well. And as always, our friends and colleagues at IVPN Network, thanks to all of you for joining us today. And we hope you enjoy the webinar, and we hope it's useful for you. And to everyone else joining us, welcome to you as well. Thanks for coming. So I said, welcome adventurers. Usually I say welcome researchers, but really what you are, if you're a researcher, is you're an adventurer. You're making discoveries, you're going places that people have never gone before. And what does an adventurer need? A map to success. And you've got your findings, you've done your research, and it's time to publish, and you need a success map for the best possible reach, the best possible impact for your paper. And who better to guide us through this adventure than a real life Indiana Jones character, someone who travels the world digging up treasures. You're not wearing your Indiana Jones hat, Gareth.
I should be. Scott, how are you today? How's it going? Everything's going well?
Very well. I should introduce you properly, everyone. This is Dr. Gareth Dyke, not Indiana Jones, although I like to think so. Welcome, Gareth.
Thank you very much. Yes, wonderful to be here. And once again, we're here with another of our EdAnts Learning Lab webinar presentations.
We are, and thank you all so much for joining, and thank you, Gareth, for taking time to share your knowledge with us. And we're going to get to you and your exciting history and your adventures in just a moment. But for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we are EdAnts, and we've been supporting researchers for more than 25 years. And Gareth and I work with the Learning Lab, which has been supporting research training for the past 3+ years. So welcome everyone, and we hope that today's event is useful and informative for you. But over to our adventurer, Dr. Gareth Dyke.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Scott. And again, welcome everybody from around the world. We have a very large number of participants joining us today, so we're particularly happy about that. And I think it's because this question, how can I plan my publication? How can I map out my publication, is one of the most common questions that we get in our workshops, in our training, and when we talk to researchers around the world. So who am I? You're probably asking. Well, Gareth is my name. I'm an academic for many years, working in the UK, working in the US, working in Ireland, publishing some papers, doing some research, and now I'm happy to say working with the EdAnts team, developing content and helping our friends and colleagues all around the world, especially people for whom English is not a first language. What are we going to talk about today? Adventurers, as Scott said, you've got research done. You're doing fantastic, excellent research. You wouldn't be in the position that you're in if you weren't doing great, fantastic research. But how can you get that research, those data written up and published? How can I plan a publication? This is, as we mentioned, one of the most common questions that we always get asked at EdAnts when we talk to researchers. So just as is normal for our monthly webinar presentations, we're going to divide this one up into 3 parts. We're going to talk first of all about journal selection, then we're going to talk about outlining your manuscript, and then a little bit about the stages of writing as we build up that map for your success as a writing and publishing academic. Scott's going to jump back in with questions, and we're also going to do a bunch of screen shares over the course of this webinar so you can see how EdAnts and the EdAnts Learning Lab content and tools can help you with your publication planning. So let's get started. Let's jump in. Let's initially talk about the most important choice that you will make as a researcher, and that's which journal are you going to pick for your next paper. And we always recommend that you do this before you start to write, and you'll see why that's so important in a minute. Lots of academics, lots of researchers, they write up papers and then they think, Where am I going to get this published? Which journal am I going to target? That may very well be the wrong way round, as you'll see in a moment. And of course, Q&A number 1 is going to come up in about 5 minutes or so. So get ready. You can ask us anything about journal selection. Scott's manning the chat box, so you can type your questions. If you have any questions, don't be shy. We will try to answer them in just a few minutes' time. Why is it so important to make a good selection of a journal for your paper? Well, about 30,000 papers get published every week in just the medical sciences, about 2 million papers in STEM subjects every year. So how are you going to stand out? How are you going to make sure that people read and use and cite your excellent research? Journal selection, finding a good target journal is key. And this slide summarizes what people are looking for, what researchers are looking for in different kinds of journal styles. What's the purpose of your journal? Are you passing across information, trying to persuade somebody about an argument, or are you writing purely for entertainment? Who are your audience? Perhaps the most important question to ask yourself when selecting a journal. So what level of technical detail will you give? What supporting evidence is required, and what tone are you going to write the paper in? People always ask us, they always ask questions like, how much information should I put into the methods? How much information should go into the discussion? It depends upon your target journal. That's what gives you the structure of your writing. So target your journal before you begin the writing process. I never start to write until I've decided on a target journal is a quote that I've heard many, many times from successful researchers around the world. Every journal's different. What kind of article will you write? You're going to have to self-evaluate. And how can you pick a journal? Well, one of the first things you can do is talk to colleagues, talk to other researchers. Look where those successful researchers working in your field are getting their work published. And don't forget to make pre-submission inquiries. One of the tricks, one of the key ways that you can communicate your work effectively is to talk to journal editors before you make your submission and ask them, would you be interested in publishing my paper? Authors think about impact. Of course they do. They think about reputation. They think about reach within a field, and they think about whether their publications will be open access or not, accessibility. So impact, reputation, reach within your field, and open access are key considerations for authors when deciding which journal to pick. So how can you do it? We've got 3 rules for selecting journals. Rule number 1, aim high. Always aim for journals with the higher impact factors. Make a list of journals that other researchers in your field are publishing their work in, and go for the ones with higher impact factors. Choosing appropriately, of course, we can help you with that. You'll learn about that in just a moment. And we can also provide training to help you learn to manage and sell your submissions. Authors, you and I, researchers, we want speed. We want a decent impact factor. And we want those articles to have high reach and readership. So things to think about, as this is, of course, one of the most important choices that you will make. So aim high, target effectively, and let us, with our training, with all of the great content on the Learning Lab, learning.edants.com, help you to learn to manage and sell those article submissions effectively. We have 10 steps. We'll give you this as a downloadable or something very similar at the end of this training session. Things to think about when you start to characterize your journal selection. Things to have a think about, a checklist when coming up with a target journal for your next article. And let's have a think about this, and maybe you've got questions. I'm sure you have, because of course this is the most important choice that you will make. Which journal are you going to publish your next article in? Scott, how are we doing? Lots of questions so far, or?
We've got
Any
some
interest?
questions coming in, Gareth. Sure, they're trickling in. I've got a couple questions that came right out of the gate. So the first question is, how shall I calculate which impact factor of journal is right for me to submit to?
That's a
Is
great
there
question.
some
Yeah.
formula to calculate which IF I should aim for, which type of journal?
It depends on subject area. It depends on your message. It depends on what it is you have to tell your readers. How significant is your work? And of course, it's easy for me to say, how do you figure out the significance of your work? Well, again, have a look at what other academics, other researchers in your subject area are getting published. I always say to young researchers, find those key individuals, those key research groups in your area internationally, have a look at their websites, have a look at their publication track records. Are they publishing research that's similar to yours in great high impact journals? You can use that technique to identify those good questions as well and target to journals, talk to editors, write pre-submission inquiries, get a journal lined up before it's time to make your submission. But there's no formula for it. There's no right or wrong answer. And we've all done it. We've all gotten a great piece of research and ended up publishing it in a journal that maybe, we feel later in our careers we could have done a bit better with that piece of research in terms of our target journal. So yeah, important question to think about.
Great, thank you so much, Gareth, and thanks for your question. And a related question is it better to aim high and risk rejection than to aim maybe a little bit lower and ensure that my paper has a better chance of being published? This
Again,
is a
that's a
question
yeah.
from Mina. Sorry, Gareth, this is a question from Mina.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry to interrupt you, Scott. That's a fantastic question because that's the trade-off that we always face. It takes time for reviews to happen. It takes time for editors to make decisions, but maybe less time in some of those higher impact factor journals. So it is actually always worth sending those pre-submission inquiries. If you've got a result and you think you have something that's significant enough for some big impact factor journals, there's nothing stopping you sending a pre-submission inquiry, writing a short email. We can certainly help you with that. We provide that service, by the way, at EdAnt. So get in touch with us at the end of this webinar to find out more. Write a short email. You can send that to 10 or 15 or 20 or more journal editors. Get some responses back. That's why it's important to do that, because then you won't waste time making submissions blindly and maybe sitting around for a few weeks waiting for a decision. So pre-submission inquiries can help to answer that question. Great question though, Mina. Thank you so much for it.
Great, thank you, Gareth, and thanks, Mina. And we do have some resources for pre-submission inquiries. I'll share the link a little bit later in the chat box, Gareth's own magical template for sending pre-submission inquiries. I'll share that with everyone in just a couple of minutes. And I've also shared in the chat box a link to a free lesson on assessing your findings for better journal selection. It's on the Learning Lab, totally free. You can go there and check out the lesson anytime, and it will help you to make some more informed decisions about what your impact factor might actually be. Great, thank you, Gareth, and thanks, Mina. This is a question from Sheba, and the question is there a website which gives the list of journals according to their subject area?
That's a fantastic question, because if you hold on just a few minutes to the end of this Q&A session, we'll answer that for you by showing you the EdAnt's journal selector tool. So that is one great way where you can find a list of journals with their information, with their impact factors and other like associated information. So just wait just for 1 second. I think we may have 1 or 2 more questions, and then Scott's gonna share his screen and show everybody like our wonderful, and it is wonderful, EdAnt's journal selector tool.
Great, thanks for your question, and thanks, Gareth, for your answer. Here's a question from our friend Anthony. Hello, Anthony. Anthony asks, I want to publish quickly, but I also want a high impact factor. Does quicker publication mean lower impact factor?
Great question, Anthony. And the answer is, it depends on the journal. Some high impact factor journals take time, but these days, one of the ways that impact factor is, of course, calculated is speed of reviews, number of issues, number of papers that get published. And of course, the higher the impact factor a journal is, by definition, the more issues, the more articles they will be publishing. Have a look at Nature and Science, for example. These are the highest impact factor journals. They're publishing on a weekly basis. And so actually, it's the peer review process that takes the time, I would say, not the publication process. If you've got something that's good enough to get published in one of those journals, you think, make a pre-submission inquiry. I would say that within days, hopefully, you'll get a decision back from one of the editors. They'll say, no, sorry, that's just not interesting enough for our audience. Or they'll say, sure, Anthony, we'd love to see a submission, in which case you can put your paper in. And then it's actually, I'm afraid to say, the peer review process that takes the time. So yes, not really, but higher impact factor journals are publishing quicker. So in fact, we should see some kind of correlation with those kind of articles. Thanks, Anthony. I hope that answers your question. Great question.
Great question. Yeah, thanks as always, Anthony. And some more great questions about journal selection here, Gareth. I think we've got enough time. This is a question from Melanie, and Melanie asks, if a submission is rejected, you have to change the journal that you want to publish in. Do you have to rewrite the whole paper when you're aiming for a new
Ooh.
journal?
Fantastic question, Melanie. And what I always used to do when I was a much more active researcher than I am these days is I'd have target journals in kind of tiers in my head. So for example, we would try to submit a lot of our work to Proceedings of the Royal Society. Okay, they have a big biology journal that we used to publish often in. And we had another journal that was like a slightly lower tier journal, but we had chosen it because it had very similar formatting requirements to our number one choice with a lot of our papers. So that's something to keep in mind as well. You may have lots of choice as an author submitting to lots of different journals, but if you see one that, for example, has a free form submission, as many journals do these days, they don't mind what format you make the submission in so long as the format is consistent, or you're choosing journals that have similar formatting requirements, because of course you can still waste a lot of time reformatting and changing the style between different journals. The worst one I found was when you submit something to Science, for example, and it got rejected, as it almost always did. We'd always think, hey, like let's try Nature, let's give it a go. And then of course we had to spend days reformatting the paper, and then it would just get rejected anyway. So I do totally feel your pain, but try to target in that way, I think is quite helpful. Thanks for the question. Great question.
Great question, thank you. We've got time for maybe a couple more. Here's a question from here in Japan. This is from Tomoko. Tomoko asks, I'm submitting my draft to a journal, but it takes a long time to review. They're having difficulties finding reviewers, and she says she couldn't imagine that before submitting. And she checked their average review time, and in her case, it's taking much longer than the average review time for that journal. So is it possible to know this sort of thing before you submit to a journal, that it's going to take that much time in review?
It is, and you can have a look yourself at the metadata on the journal's website, or just go in and have a look at some of the papers they've published recently. Have a look at the dates on the top of the article, because those will tell you date received, date reviewed, date revised, date accepted. So a big red flag, of course, is if you're seeing very long times between reception of an article and publication. So you want to try to get your papers, out as fast as possible. Of course you do. The average length of time, it's about 3 months across the publishing industry from submission to online publication. So I would look for that. There are some other websites that you can have a look at in order to get that data, and we'll share some of those with you in the chat box or in follow-up emails at the end of this session, because some people in particular subject areas have collected that kind of data. But yeah, have a look at the metadata, and don't be afraid of writing to the editor. If it's been a long time, we always recommend after about 6 to 8 weeks, it's time to send a follow-up email to the editor and say, hey, maybe there's an issue with the review process. Keep it polite and make some suggestions for additional peer reviewers. If they're having trouble finding reviewers for your paper, they may very well appreciate an email from you with a few suggestions. So that's a good technique to also have a think about when you follow up once your papers have been in the system.
Great, thank you, Gareth, and thanks, Tomoko, for your question. And one last quick question on journal selection, probably a quick answer, I think, from you, Gareth. And the question is it possible to submit to more than one journal and therefore to be published in more than one journal? Gareth?
It's not possible, it's not ethical to submit the same piece of work or even a very similar piece of work to more than one journal at the same time. You can, of course, have multiple papers in submission with multiple journals at the same time, but the pieces of work, the research, have to be significantly different from one another. If you have any doubt that something that you're writing up is too similar to something that you've got written up and ready to submit, to another journal, then you should talk to us, get in touch with us, or ask the editor, because multiple submissions is really not ethical and something that you should be avoiding at all costs. Great questions, great questions. I think now it's time to learn more about our wonderful EdAnts journal selector tool. Scott?
Sure, let's take a look. I'm going to share my screen here. So I'm going to very briefly introduce you to the journal selector tool. Hope everyone can see my screen okay. Great, so this is the journal selector. You can find it at edons.com/journal selector, or you can go to tools.edons.com and also take a look there. So it's very easy to find a journal for your next paper. Now, this is the original journal selector tool on the internet. There are many imitators now, but what's special about the Edons journal selector is that we don't work for any one publisher. So you know the results you get from the engine are going to be much more neutral. We're not going to try to steer you to one publisher's journals or another. So the Edons journal selector is agnostic, it's neutral. So if I type some keywords or some expressions in here, like maybe I want to find something in my field, which is education technology, just type the search words into the field. Maybe I'll narrow it down a bit, look for something in pedagogy, and I can find some results that I can then filter further. So I'm getting my initial results here. I can see a couple of journals here related to my field. That's great. I can also add some more options to limit the results a bit further. So have a go and try the Edons journal selector yourself next time you're looking for a journal for your paper, and I'm sure you'll have a more informed set of choices to choose from. So I'll put it back to you, Gareth. And in the meantime, once again, the address is tools.edons.com. You can find our journal selector tool right there. And again, we're not working for any one publisher, we're working for you, for researchers.
Great, great. Well, I must say that, Scott, as you just mentioned, the EdAnts Journal Selector tool is quite unique across the publishing, across the academic support industry, because most publishers have got a journal selector tool, but if you use it, you're just going to get their journals. So if you want something that gives you all of the possible journals across all of the different publishers, then what you need is a tool that doesn't have particular ties to a particular publisher. And that's, of course, why we why we find this to be such a great thing to have a look at. So, I mean, do have a go. You don't lose anything. It's completely free, and you can jump on over and have a look at the end of this session, of course, as Scott just showed you on his screen. Let's continue with our presentation. Let's move on. We've selected a journal, so that gives us the structure of our writing. We know like what we're going to do. We know that the article we're going to write is going to look like an article that's already been published in our target journal, and that significantly speeds up the process. That helps a lot, because you don't have to worry about what will I do with this bit, or what will I do with that bit, how much information will I put into this bit or that bit. You know, because you've targeted your journal beforehand. The next stage, the next part of the roadmap, the adventure map, is of course outlining your manuscript itself. And so in a few moments, we'll come back and answer some more questions. You can ask us anything about what we're going to talk about now, outlining your paper. So as usual, in our As usual in our dance events, don't be shy about putting your questions there into the chat box. And the first thing to say about outlining a manuscript is, of course, that transparency is the most important element of successful academic article writing. You've got to show your readers, your reviewers, your editors enough information for them to understand what you did in your study, be able to review it and understand it, and potentially be able to replicate your results. So the methods section is the most important part. It's the part that we recommend you begin your outlining process with. The parts of the paper where reviewers and readers are most likely to find issues. Ask yourself the key question: is there enough information here for another reader to be able to understand and repeat my study? So what did you use? How did you conduct the study? And how was your data analyzed? These are very key questions at the start of the process. Then come in and think about structuring the beginning of your paper. After you've thought through the methods, you've done that, you've carried out the work, you've collected your data, you know what your method section is going to look like. Then we recommend that starting your research paper with the introduction is best done with a short 3-paragraph framework. The average length of an academic paper published across all of the publishing industry is about 5,000 or 6,000 words. Your paper's got to be balanced. You can't write 10,000 word introduction. You've got to keep it short. 3 paragraphs works well. Have a look at high impact factor journal articles. They always tell the reader what the question is that the paper's going to address at the beginning. Then they do what's called the state of the art. They tell the reader in the second part of the introduction what's recently been published that's key to the question that the paper is addressing. Not a literature review, not hundreds of citations, key recent references, key review papers that summarize that state of the art. Why is your question interesting? And then you finish your introduction by telling the reader what the paper is going to do. Here we show. In this paper, we show. I demonstrate something short that tells the reader what the article is going to do, that links the introduction into the method section. Establishing your focus is hugely important. So have a think about what you're investigating, what you're measuring, and from where your measurements are coming from. Variables, conditions, interventions. What's the measured outcome? And where are you taking those measurements from? And tell those pieces of information to your readers at the end of your introduction. Luckily, if you're working in particular research areas, this is already done for you. Medical researchers will be familiar with the PICO checklist, but you can modify this for your own subject area as well. Of course you can. You can take these medical checklists, PICO checklists, and think about your own research. So what does your research relate to? Which treatment did you use? Where's your control? What comparisons are you making? And perhaps most important of all, what is it that you are measuring? Take advantage of the different tools, the different ways in which other fields have structured these different parts of academic writing. You can build them into your own research, into your own subject area, identifying your central theme. What's your research question? What are your aims? And what is your conclusion? We recommend that you answer these questions from your own research before starting to outline your paper. Why is your work important? What's unknown? What's the limitation? Where's the controversy? What do you plan to achieve? How is this related to a problem? How are you answering a question? How are you advancing a research field? You'll be familiar, of course you will, with the famous hourglass shape for academic article writing. Starting general, getting more specific, methods and results, very specific to your particular study. And then, of course, you build out your discussion. Start your discussion by answering the question that you outlined in the introduction. The readers want to know what the answer is at the beginning of the discussion. And then get more general. Why is this important? What other areas for future research does your work raise? The IMRAD structure feels a bit prohibitive, but it's not. You can move different bits around depending on your article structure, depending upon your target journal. So that again is why it's so important to have that structure in mind before you begin the writing process. Where does your target journal want you to put the methods? Where does your target journal want you to put the results? Do you have to include a literature review? So have a think about these topics when you outline your paper and you link your ideas together. Of course, in the introduction, a situation, a problem, a question. Of course, in the methods and results, your approaches and your solution to that problem, to that question. And then, of course, in the discussion, the answer to the question and your evaluation of it in the context of other work and giving your own opinion. We always used to say this to research students. An academic paper is supposed to get across your own opinion about a particular topic. So don't forget to put that in as well. People want to know what you think. Somebody asked me yesterday, how do I evaluate the literature? How do I know what's good and what's not? As a researcher, often that is your opinion. So don't be afraid of sharing it in your academic articles. So here we go with our second Q&A. Any questions about outlining a paper, the second part of the roadmap to success in academic article writing? Scott, how are we doing?
We've got some questions coming in, Gareth. Here's a question from Samil. This is a great question. The question is, I can't control myself, or I can't stop myself when I start to conduct research. I know I need to set boundaries, but I don't know how. I would love to hear your tips on that. This is a great question. How do we establish that kind of focus, or to narrow our focus when we're doing research, Gareth?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And lots of people have that thought, I think, and may have not been or may have been afraid to ask a question like that. And you'll see that effective researchers, if you watch the leader of your research group or one of the senior academics in your hospital or in your research university or wherever, one of the keys of being an effective researcher is knowing when to stop and knowing, firstly, I should have said firstly, how to define a question that's interesting and that will be answerable, and then when to stop when collecting data and doing experiments. Because of course, it's very easy to get sidetracked, to go off down the rabbit hole, to start collecting lots and lots of data that you don't need to answer the question. So number one thing, identify your question and then collect enough data, enough information to answer that question to the best of your ability, and so that that is then a publishable piece of work. And it's a very difficult balance to strike. We know that. By the way, on the Learning Lab, we have lots of courses that you can have a look at, planning your research projects, data collection and things like that. But, you know, we have to learn from people who have a little bit more experience than we do. So I would say, have a look at the way that some of the more senior academics, the senior, more effective researchers in your department are doing it, because that's what they've learned to do. Great question though, fantastic. Thank you for that question.
Great question, thank you, and thanks for your answer, Gareth. We've got a new fresh flood of questions coming in on journal selection. I think we really sparked people's interest. Do you want to go back and grab a couple of those questions, Gareth? Journal selection
Absolutely, we have
questions?
time, of course, yeah,
Sure, it
totally.
seems like tonight's
Great,
hot topic. Here's a
wonderful.
question from Zanzulu. I hope I'm saying that correctly. The question is, should we write to an editor to send the title and abstract of the paper in order to ensure that they are interested in the paper or topic?
Yes, making pre-submission inquiries is a great trick that I didn't learn myself until a little bit later in my career. I used to do what many people do, write up a paper and then think, where am I going to submit it, and then send it off to a journal. But yeah, like if you've got the title, if you've got the abstract, then great. But you may not have that yet. You may just have the key results. You may have the key significance of the research. And of course, you should know that really if you're thinking, hey, I've got a piece of research that I'm going to write up for publication. That's kind of, you know, one of the earliest things that you'll be thinking about. I mean, you've answered the question, and why is that important and significant? So yeah, even if you've got just that, it's still now a good idea to put that into writing, put your thoughts down in an email. We can help you with that, of course. Send it to a bunch of editors and see what they say. So yeah, the more information you can give the editor, the better, but I think it's definitely worth having a go at this technique. So yeah, great question. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, great question. And in just a moment, I'm going to share the link to the pre-submission inquiry form that I mentioned earlier. I'll put that in the chat box for everyone to download. Thanks for your question. Another journal selection question, shall we?
Why not?
There's always
Absolutely.
some great journal selection questions here. This is a question from, oh, I've got the name right here. Just a moment, sorry. The question is how to choose the best ranking journal for a surgeon. If you're in the field of surgery, I think we have a lot of clinical people here today.
Mhm.
How to choose the best ranking journal for a surgeon who's publishing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one-stop shop for doing that, of course, will be to look at the EdAnts Journal Selector tool. Put in your keywords specific to your subject area, what kind of surgery, what organ systems, like what clinical approaches you're using potentially. That will give you a list of top journals. You can then rank them out by impact factors. That's one way to go. My favorite way, the way I would approach this personally will be to again look for like the key field leaders, the top people in your research area. Where are they publishing their work? What journals are they going to? The Lancet, you know, BMJ. I mean, like what journals are they picking? So yeah, those two approaches I think will help you to converge on a good choice. We also provide a journal selection service at EdAnts, so you can get in touch with us. We can give you a discount on that service. We will send your work to a number of experts with PhDs working in your subject area. They will evaluate your research, the outcomes of your study, and provide you with a number of suggestions for journals. We can even write for you to editors to help you with that pre-submission step as well. So do get in touch with Scott and I at the end of this presentation to find out more and get a discount.
Great, thanks, Gareth. And that question was from Sergey. By the way, I couldn't see the name because of the way my screen was. So thank you for your question, Sergey. It's an excellent question. How about one more journal selection question while we're waiting for some more questions about outlining?
Absolutely.
This is a question from our friend Anthony. He says, some journals give us the option to transfer to a related journal. Is it a safer option to do this, to aim to publish in journals that will allow us to transfer to another journal? Is that a safe option, Gareth?
Yeah, it can be a very good option. Some subject areas also provide that that option as well. So neuroscience is one good example of this. There's a network of neuroscience journals published by all different publishers, by the way, but they allow the transfer of peer review comments between members of their consortium. So have a look at your subject area, because in your subject area, there may very well be a consortium of journals from different publishers, or indeed within your publisher, within your publishing group. Sure, if you've just been rejected at Nature, then you can transfer the paper within the Nature Publishing Group manuscript transfer system to another journal, which may not be as good, but will be similar in impact factor. And other publishers have the same online systems too. So it can help a lot to speed up the process. And of course, publishers want you to do that because it means that your research stays within that particular family of journals. So again, if you have questions or you need help with this particular step, don't hesitate to get in touch and ask us. We can help. We're always here to help.
Great, thanks for your question. And two related questions that we're getting from a number of attendees today. And one question relates to open access journals. How can we find safe, non-predatory open access journals? And then a related question is it possible to find good free open access journals to publish in? Any thoughts on that, Gareth? Open access.
Yeah, open access, that just means that your paper is published without any paywall. Anybody can download it, anybody can access it. There's no restrictions. Of course, however, the publishing model, the open access publishing model, means that often authors have to pay the article processing charge, the APC, and that can range hugely from a few $100s up to thousands of dollars in some journals. Journals that don't charge an article processing charge are often published by societies, so they have some other way of funding that model. These are diamond open access journals. A good place to start, other than of course the EDANS journal selector tool, is the directory of open access journals, the doaj.org. You can go in there, you can search for journals in your subject area, you can rank them by cost. You can have a look at whether the journal has a publishing fee or not, but be a bit careful, of course, because lots of journals that don't charge a fee are just getting started, so they don't yet have impact factors, they don't yet have that much of a reputation. The other problem, as you've highlighted in the first of those questions, is that there are also lots of predatory journals, publishers out there, just trying to get your money, and they're not going to really peer review or publish your paper properly. Look at the editorial boards, look at whether those journals are members of the DOAJ, CABELS, the COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics. Those are all markers to help you avoid predatory journals. We have lots of content as well, courses and other information on our website that can help you. So make the choice carefully. Don't just jump on the next email that you get offering you a cheap publication, because that may very well be an email from a predatory publisher. Yeah, great questions. Thank you very much for those questions. Perfect.
Great questions. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Gareth. And in the mailouts that will follow this webinar tomorrow, there'll be links to some of the courses that Gareth mentioned, our Journal Selector course, the Journal Selector tool, and everything else that we've mentioned today for courses and resources. So have a look out for that email tomorrow. And maybe it's time, Gareth, to take a look at our My Manuscript tool for just a moment, shall we?
Absolutely, yeah, it's another wonderful tool that we have on our tools.edans.com website to help colleagues around the world writing and publishing their papers. So over to you, Scott.
Great. All right, you can find the tool at tools.edans.com. I'll just very briefly show you how to start a manuscript and start outlining your manuscript using the My Manuscript tool. So I'm just going to click here, Start Now. I'm going to create a new project. Let's call this My Outline. And I'm going to click Next. And again, my field is education. So there are other fields you can select from as well, and lots of subfields as well. So from education, my particular field is technology and pedagogy. So I'll choose that. And I'm going to just select the standard article type. We do have several other types of articles that you can use to give you a rough outline to start writing from. So I'm just going to choose a standard IMRAD type manuscript here. Click Save and Begin. And as you can see, I've got all the sections here, and I can start writing anywhere. As you're going to see in a few minutes, Gareth's going to recommend that you start writing from the methods. So I would start there, and you can open up some tips and instructions here that come in a pop-up window. And these are expert tips from our EDANS experts to help you at each section of writing the manuscript. And there are also some examples and checklists to follow, again, just to help guide your writing. So that's the My Manuscript tool. It's a very useful tool for outlining. You can also start your outline in another piece of software like Microsoft Word or Google Sheets, and you can actually upload that outline to My Manuscript as well. So it's my favorite tool for outlining manuscripts. So over to you, Gareth. I'll turn the presentation back to you again, and let's take a look at the order of writing, Gareth. There's a recommended order, isn't there, for drafting our manuscripts? Normally, we wouldn't start at the top and start writing down from the abstract or introduction. There's probably a preferred order.
There is indeed. There is indeed. Just let me put the sharing back here so we can see hopefully my screen again. But yes, absolutely. This is called the right order. Bit of a funny old play on words there, but of course, it's not necessarily the order in which your article is structured, the order in which you'll actually write it. And that's the third part of the roadmap that we're going to talk about today. There's the survival map for being a successful adventuring researcher. How are you going to actually write your paper? You've picked a journal, you've outlined the paper using maybe some of the steps that we've talked about in our presentation today. How are you then going to write it? And of course, the next Q&A is coming up in just a few minutes, our final one for our session today. You can ask us anything about the stages of article writing. So don't be shy, keep those questions coming. Here's the right order. There's the IMRAD structure on the left-hand side of the screen. And what about the writing order. As Scott just mentioned, of course, you probably would want to start your paper with the methods or the results, because those are the bits you've either done already or have just finished before you write the introduction and the discussion. So there's a suggested approach to academic paper writing. And the key message here is you've got to keep it easy, make it simple for you. There's no right answer to any of this. We're not saying you have to write the methods first or you have to write the introduction last, whatever works for you. But it is, I think, a sensible strategy to think about what you've just done, the methods and the results. I always used to start my academic papers with figures, with tables of data, because I found that was the easiest way to initially figure out what the significance of my work was. Of course, you can get feedback from us, you can get feedback from your supervisor, you can review your work section by section. This is a very good approach. Don't give people hundreds and hundreds of pages to comment on overnight. Give them your work in sections so that they're able to give you, without getting stressed, without feeling under pressure, comments back on those different bits. And set yourself deadlines. That's also very important. If you're anything like me, if you don't have a hard deadline, you'll just leave it until tomorrow. Draft while waiting, revise your work in sequence, and don't worry about your English. Put the logic, the content before the language. We, of course, can help you with your language editing. If you need that service, we'll give you a discount code at the end of this presentation. So we can do the editing, we can do the writing for you so that your paper has the highest chance of acceptance. We came up with a number of fun stepping stones for writing an effective research article. You'll get a recording of this presentation, of course, so you can listen again. You can have a look at the tips that we put together in this slideshow whenever you want. But you need these things to have an effective research article. A short, effective title, key findings, introduction in the approach and novelty, transparency in the methods, good figures, clear outcomes and limitations in your discussion. It's got to be your own words. You can't plagiarize. Have a listen to our ethics presentations. You'll find them on our YouTube channel. You'll find them on the Learning Lab if you're wondering how not to plagiarize. And don't forget to put your deductions, your new approaches clearly in the conclusions. And as you draft your paper, you're going to be revising it. Nobody's expecting you to write a perfect academic paper on the first draft. Of course not. You're going to be working, drafting and revising, reading out your work out loud. I think that's a great tip to reduce the number of words, to make sure that your meaning is clear. Get comments, get editing from colleagues, from edants, but read your work out loud so that it's clear what your meaning is. And it's okay then, your logical flow of ideas will work within those paragraphs. Start off with something that tells the reader what the paragraph is going to be about. As you can see here, lung cancer, the leading cause of cancer mortality for men and women. That's an interesting start to the paragraph. Then the state of the art, then the information goes into the middle, and then what's the call to action? What's the reason for reading this phrase? New ways to treat or prevent lung cancer are therefore needed. It's the same as the introduction. You may be thinking, I've seen this before in the earlier part of the presentation. Of course, once you start to structure your writing, once you start to think about the outline, the structure, what goes where, you'll see that actually academic article writing is relatively simple. We can break it down into a number of tips and tricks that we think will help you to be more effective. Introduce your idea, develop your idea, and then tell the reader the importance of your idea in a single paragraph. Just one big topic per section, not lots of topics, not confusing numbers of different ideas. Introduce your idea, develop your idea, and then tell the reader the importance of that idea, which of course will then link to the next paragraph. Just like writing sentences one after the other, you're linking your paragraphs together as well. And I would say also, don't be afraid to repeat your messages. Somebody giving a presentation, a TV newsreader, a preacher in a church, they repeat their message again and again and again. They don't leave you in any doubt. At the end of the session, the end of the paper what the key message is. Your readers have to know what the key outcome of your study is. So don't be afraid of repeating it, depending on your discipline, putting it in different sections, key findings in the illustrations, main findings, the answer to the question at the start of the discussion. Tell the reader what the answer is. That's why they've read your paper. And then when you revise, when you go back over your work, when you go through that famous egg timer diagram for writing an academic paper, you're able to check that your ideas in different sections of the article support and back each other up. Is your writing logical? Do your paragraphs logically signpost from one to the other? Are your ideas consistent? Are you able to anticipate what peer reviewers might say about your work when it goes into the journal? Where are your weaknesses? What are peer reviewers likely to criticize about your work? We can help. By the way, we provide an excellent expert scientific review service at Edance, one of our most popular services, by the way. Send us your paper. We'll get it edited. We'll get it checked by an expert person with a PhD in your subject area. They'll provide you with a review just as if they were reviewing it for a journal, and then you can bulletproof, you can waterproof your work before sending it to the journal. And for this reason, the introduction should be written towards the end of the process, because academic papers need to be balanced. Select that target journal before you start to write. Look at how previous articles in that journal are structured and build out the structure for your paper in the same way. So, stages of writing, we've talked about journal selection. We've talked about outlining your paper. Now we've given you some tips, some tricks on writing, very briefly, but don't worry, on the Learning Lab, we have hours and hours and hours and hours of additional content. Scott will tell you about it in a minute to help you with your writing. So, questions? Anyone want to ask us anything about the stages of writing? Scott?
Great, thanks, Gareth. We've got some great questions about stages of writing and outlining sort of combined. So we'll go back and loop back and answer some of those outlining questions as well. So a question that several people have asked is, how should we start, or where should we start when we write a paper? And I think we mentioned that. We often recommend the MRDI order of writing. But a related question is, what if we're writing a review paper? What is the recommended order of steps for writing review papers, Gareth?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. Review papers are quite different from regular academic articles, and lots of people get confused about review papers. They are not literature review papers. It's not the same thing as writing a literature review for your PhD or for your master's, or to build up a database of literature about a project. Review papers, almost always invited by editors, asked people in particular fields who the editor of a journal feels would be an appropriate person to provide an overview of a particular area of debate or a particular question. So journal editors usually identify review paper topics. If you get invited to write one, that's fantastic. That's not to say that you can't propose these kinds of papers to journals, but you must have a target journal in mind first. It's very, very hard to get a review paper published if you've just got one written and then you're looking for a journal. How to write them? Well, they're structured around questions. They're structured around debates. So you'll need to have a look at that and provide an outline, first of all, for the structure of that particular debate. So go in and build a structure, and we can help you with that as well. One of the things that we do all the time is write structures for review papers, identify questions for review papers from authors around the world. So please get in touch with us if you're thinking of writing a review paper. We can absolutely help you to do that. So no right answer. Thanks for the great question. I hope my answer was useful in some way. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much for your question, and thanks, Gareth, for your answer. Some related questions, I'm going to loop back to some other questions related to outlining and structuring. This is a question from Mahmoud, and the question is, a common piece of feedback that they get back is that the discussion is insufficient. So we've talked about balancing out the paper. So this is one of the most common comments from reviewers. So how can we manage our discussion section and the length of the discussion section? So as researchers, we have to be critical in our reading and our paper reading, but when we write, it sort of has to be taken as a piece of new evidence or a new contribution to the field. How do we balance out that discussion section, Gareth?
Yeah, great question. And if you think about the shape of that egg timer diagram that we showed you on some of the slides today, the way to write an effective discussion is to start very specific. As we've talked about, initially you give your readers the answer to the question, what they've come to read the paper for, what's the outcome. You talk about that first of all, and then you have to relate that answer, that specific thing at the beginning of the discussion, to previous work. So go back into that state-of-the-art section, those other pieces of relevant literature, areas of debate around your particular question, and relate your outcome to other recent papers. And so by doing that, you start to build out the shape of that egg timer, getting more and more general and finishing your discussion by talking about areas for future research. What ideas have you come up with for new research directions? What will you do next? What related topics have been suggested by your research? And also, don't forget to give the readers like why the work is so significant. How does your work relate to a hot topic or a large question? So I don't know, build it out and try to maintain that shape. I would say it's a very general answer to that question. Of course, we can help if you send us your articles. We can have one of our experts look at your paper and give you specific suggestions for improvement. If you'd like to get in touch with us after the session, that would be great, so we can answer that question in detail. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much for your question. And it looks like we're running a little close to our end time here, Gareth. So maybe it's time to take another look at the My Manuscript tool. We've had some great questions today about budgeting the time, about lengths of the sections of the paper, about the writing order, structuring, outlining. And I'd like to share with you my favorite tool for manuscript writing, and then a course that we've developed to go along with the My Manuscript tool. So let me share my screen with you all here, and you can see the My Manuscript tool. Okay, here we go. Can everyone see my screen okay? Yeah, so here is the Learning Lab courses page. This is learning.edonstat.com/all-courses. And there's a course here called Writing Your Manuscript Step by Step. And this course will lead you through all the stages that we've talked about today, writing your manuscript in the order that we suggest. And there are tips for every stage. Now you can use this with whichever writing tool you like. If you're using Microsoft Word or you're using Google Documents. Of course, we recommend My Manuscript tool because you get even more guidance and more structure for your paper. But whatever you use, this course will give you a step-by-step guide to writing all the parts of your manuscript. And as you can see, it's in the order that we suggested. First, we talk about the right order and explain why it's best to write this way. And then it starts right there in the methods, and then gets through the results, discussion, conclusion, introduction, all the stages that we briefly mentioned today. So 1 hour is very short to go through all of the stages of outlining, structuring, and writing. So feel free to click on this course, go through all the stages, and you'll see our expert guidance on the stages of writing. So there's also a promotion we'd like to share with you today. We're going to offer all of our content free for everyone here. All you need to do is go to this landing page. It's learning.edons.com/successmap. Just visit us here. If you have an Edons account, you can log in and you can start a free trial of just everything, all of our courses, tools, content, ebooks, everything. It's very easy to sign up. Visit us here and get your free content, and we'll leave that open for the next week, and you can explore everything on Learning Lab.
Will you just give me the slide controls back again, Scott? We can just jump
Sure, of
through the
course.
wrap up. But yeah, everybody, you should absolutely. We look forward to talking to you and hearing from you and providing with as much help as we can, because that's what we're here for. That's what we love to do. I mean, Scott and I are both educators. We try to spend as much time as possible every day helping researchers with their writing and publishing. Today, we've talked about the e-course, the journal selection e-course, the writing your manuscript step-by-step e-course and tool. Have a look at those, and the research writing e-course that Scott just mentioned at the end there. So don't forget Success Map 10. Ladies and gentlemen, adventurers, Success Map 10 is your discount code if you would like to get 10% off any of our EdAnts services. And as Scott just mentioned, learning.edants.com/success map is your unique sign-up link to get a year's free access to the EdAnts Learning Lab. Scott?
Great. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and remember the discount code if you'd like to order our services. So thanks everyone. All content there is free for the next week, so explore everything on Learning Lab, and thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you, Gareth, for sharing your knowledge. I always learn so much from you, so thank you for your time and expertise, Gareth.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next month for the next EdAnts Learning Lab webinar event. Have a great day and stay safe. Bye now.
Thanks, Gareth. Thank you, everyone.